The explosion that destroyed the convoy left Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan alone in hostile territory with nothing but a rifle, a half-empty magazine, and the certainty that her own command had abandoned her. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 2007. The first light of dawn painted the distant mountains in amber and gold, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost beautiful. Almost. Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan knew better. At 29 years old with sharp hazel eyes that could read terrain, like most people read books, and auburn hair pulled tight in a tactical braid, she was too experienced to be seduced by deceptive beauty. As a combat medic and designated marksman who had served 3 tours in places that changed names depending on who controlled the maps, Morgan understood that beauty in war zones was just camouflage for danger. From her position in the second vehicle of the convoy, Morgan scanned the ridgelines through her optics. Her M24 SWS sniper system was an extension of herself, the weapon's weight as familiar as her own heartbeat. The scope revealed nothing but rocks and scrub, yet something felt wrong. The hairs on her neck stood up a primitive warning system that had saved her life more than once. You feel it too. The voice beside her belonged to Master Sergeant Frank Donovan, 58 years old with salt and pepper hair, cropped with military short, and a face weathered by decades of desert sun. Donovan was old-school Delta Force, a veteran of the First Gulf War, and the man who had trained Morgan since she qualified for special operations. He had initially doubted a woman could handle the physical and mental demands of their unit, but Morgan had proven him wrong so thoroughly that he now considered her the daughter he never had. Morgan nodded without lowering her scope. This valley is too quiet. No birds, no movement. Donovan keyed his radio. Viper actual, this is Viper 2. Request halt and reassessment. Something feels off. The radio crackled. Negative Viper 2. Command wants those intel packages from the village before sundown. Keep moving. Morgan saw Donovan's jaw tighten, the only sign of his frustration. The mission was supposed to be routine, a reconnaissance patrol through a border region that intelligence claimed was lightly defended. Their team of 8 operators was tasked with gathering intel on Taliban movements and reporting back. Simple, clean, low risk. That assessment is wrong, Donovan muttered, too low for the radio to pick up. I told Colonel Harrison last night after I saw the satellite images. This area had activity that wasn't in the briefing. Morgan glanced at him sharply. And he ignored you. Ordered us to proceed anyway. Said my concerns were noted. Donovan's face was impassive, but his eyes told a different story. Suspicion, anger. Keep your weapon ready. If we hit trouble, aim for the high ground first. The sun climbed higher and sweat trickled down Morgan's neck despite the vehicle's air conditioning. The convoy wound deeper into the valley, massive rock formations rising on both sides, creating a natural choke point, perfect for an ambush. Her finger rested lightly outside the trigger guard of her rifle ready. 3 minutes later, the world exploded. The IED that hit the lead vehicle was just the beginning. The Humvee lifted 6 feet in the air before crashing back to earth, flipping onto its side in a cloud of dust and smoke. Before Morgan could even process what had happened, RPG fire came from 3 directions simultaneously, perfectly coordinated to trap the convoy in the valley with no escape routes. Contact front and both sides, Morgan shouted, swinging her rifle toward the nearest muzzle flash. Donovan was already on the radio. Viper actual, this is Viper 2 heavy contact, multiple RPGs, troops in contact, need immediate support. The firefight lasted maybe 90 seconds before the second vehicle, Morgan's vehicle, took a direct hit from an RPG. The explosion threw her clear, slamming her against rocks with force that cracked ribs and dislocated her left shoulder. Through the ringing in her ears and blurred vision, she could hear the staccato crack of AK-47 fire, the screams of wounded teammates, and the victorious shouts of Taliban fighters closing on the destroyed convoy. She crawled behind an outcropping of rocks, forcing her dislocated shoulder back into the socket with a movement that made her vision white out from pain. When she could see again, she found Donovan beside her, dragging himself with one arm. Blood soaked his lower body, and Morgan immediately recognized the severity of his wounds. Shrapnel had torn through his right leg, severing the femoral artery. Stay still, she hissed, already pulling medical supplies from her kit. She applied a combat tourniquet with practiced efficiency, knowing it would only buy time, not save him without proper surgery. Listen to me. Donovan grabbed her wrist. his grip still strong despite the blood loss. This was a setup. No random Taliban unit has this level of coordination. They knew exactly where to hit us. Morgan worked as he spoke, stabilizing his wounds as best she could under fire. I need to get you to the extraction point. Donovan shook his head. Radio's damaged, only receiving, not transmitting. As if to confirm his words, their radio crackled to life. All units, Viper actual, immediate withdrawal to Rally Point Bravo. Enemy forces in battalion strength converging on position. Extraction birds cannot penetrate hostile airspace. All units withdraw immediately. Acknowledge. Morgan grabbed the radio, tried to respond, but only static emerged. She could hear her teammates trying to acknowledge their voices, cutting out as enemy fire found them. Then the transmission that would haunt her, Viper actual. We have 4 KIA confirmed. Remaining units withdrawing under fire. Cannot locate Morgan or Donovan. Presumed KIA. Recommend immediate extraction of survivors. Copy. Morgan and Donovan listed KIA. All units withdraw. Out. The words hit Morgan like physical blows. They were abandoning them. Command had declared them dead without confirmation and ordered immediate withdrawal. The remaining survivors were retreating to the rally point 40 kilometers away, and extraction helicopters were pulling back because of enemy air defenses. They left us, she whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. They think we're dead. Donovan corrected, his voice growing weaker. Different thing. But Morgan listened carefully. This was no accident. I found intelligence last night suggesting there might be someone feeding information to the Taliban. Someone high up. Morgan pressed a bandage against another of his wounds. Who's bio? I don't know, but I reported my concerns to Colonel Harrison directly. Now here we are, ambushed exactly where I suggested we shouldn't go. Donovan coughed, blood flecking his lips. You need to get that intel back. There's more at stake than just us. I'm not leaving you, Morgan insisted, though she knew the tactical reality. Donovan would not survive the journey back, not with his injuries, not through hostile territory. Yes, you are. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a GPS device and a folded paper map. Take these. Radio's receiving only, but it might give you information. My Kabar is in my left boot. Take it too. Morgan fought back tears. In 3 tours, she had never cried in the field, but this was Donovan, her mentor. The closest thing to a father she had since her own father, a ranger, had died in Somalia in 1993. She had been 11 when they folded the flag over his casket, and it was Donovan who had trained her when she joined the army to follow in her father's footsteps. I can stabilize you, find shelter until extraction can come back, she argued, but they both knew it was a lie. Listen to me, Alexis. He used her first name, something he did only in the most serious moments. You have a duty. Get the intel on that traitor back to command. Make it expensive for anyone hunting you. He pressed a compass into her hand. This USGI has never failed me. It won't fail you. Now go. That's an order, soldier. Morgan took a shuddering breath, then nodded sharply. She collected Donovan's Kabar combat knife, GPS map, and compass, adding them to her own gear. Then she checked her weapons. Her M24 had survived the blast along with her M17 sidearm. She had approximately 30 rounds for the rifle and 2 magazines for the pistol. Not much for the journey ahead. I'll send help, she promised. Donovan's eyes were clear despite the pain. I know you will. Remember your training. You're the best student I ever had. Now go, I'll cover your exfil. The words were barely out of his mouth when shouts in Pashto indicated Taliban fighters were closing in on their position. Morgan hesitated one final moment, then clasped Donovan's hand briefly before slipping away into the rocks. She moved 50 meters up the ridge, finding a concealed position with a view of where she had left Donovan. He had dragged himself into the open rifle ready. When the first Taliban fighters appeared, Donovan opened fire, drawing their attention. Morgan understood with sickening clarity he was sacrificing himself to give her time to escape. Through her scope, she watched as Taliban fighters surrounded Donovan. She could have taken out 3, maybe 4, but there were at least 15 of them. It would only reveal her position and waste the sacrifice he was making. Professional discipline won over emotional impulse, and Morgan forced herself to watch as they closed in on her mentor. Donovan fought until the last moment. When he ran out of ammunition, he triggered a grenade, taking several enemies with him in a final act of defiance. Morgan bit her lip until it bled, preventing any sound from escaping. Then she turned away, committing the coordinates to memory. She would return for him when this was over. No one left behind, not permanently. Now she had to survive. Morgan assessed her situation with the clinical detachment her training demanded. She was approximately 200 kilometers from friendly territory in an area she knew only from briefing maps. Her supplies were limited to what she carried: first aid kit, minimal water, no food. Her radio could receive but not transmit. She had a dislocated shoulder now reset but throbbing with pain and at least two cracked ribs that made each breath a struggle. But she was alive, armed, and trained for exactly this kind of situation. Every combat medic learned survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. Every designated marksman learned to operate independently. And Morgan had grown up learning wilderness survival from her father before he deployed for the last time. She could hear enemy fighters searching the area, their voices carrying in the morning air. Morgan waited until they moved past her position, then began her evasion. She moved perpendicular to their search pattern, using terrain features to mask her movement, leaving no trail, making no sound. Basic SEER training, evade detection, survive to fight another day. For the first 6 hours, Morgan focused purely on putting distance between herself and the ambush site. She moved west the general direction of friendly territory, according to her map, keeping to high ground when possible for better observation. Each step was measured, each movement considered. The desert sun climbed higher, baking the rocks and forcing her to regulate her pace to prevent heat exhaustion. Her medical training was as valuable as her combat skills now, as she carefully monitored her own condition, recognizing the early signs of dehydration and adjusting her water consumption accordingly. By midday, she had traveled perhaps 10 kilometers, slow progress but necessary given the hostile patrols sweeping the area. Morgan found a defensive position in a rocky overhang that provided shade and good sight lines to likely approach routes. There she treated her injuries more thoroughly, taping her ribs, cleaning cuts, checking her shoulder function. The physical pain was manageable. The knowledge that Donovan was gone, that she was alone behind enemy lines with no extraction plan, that someone in command might have deliberately sent them into an ambush, those thoughts were harder to control. Focus on the mission, she told herself. Survive. Evade. Return with the intelligence. Everything else was secondary. Morgan checked her radio, cycling through frequencies, hoping to find one that might work for transmission. Nothing. The damage was beyond field repair. She was completely isolated. No communication, no support, no extraction in enemy territory that wasn't even on official maps, which meant any rescue would first have to determine she was alive, then locate her in hundreds of square kilometers of hostile wilderness. The odds were not in her favor. But Morgan had never cared much about odds. She examined the terrain from her position. Mountains to the north and east, probably impassable without proper equipment. Dense ravines to the south, good concealment, but limiting mobility and easy to get trapped. West appeared to be more valleys and open terrain, dangerous but navigable. Based on her last known position in the convoy's route, friendly territory was probably west or southwest. That would be her heading, moving at night, hiding during day, avoiding all contact unless absolutely necessary. As she waited for darkness, Morgan checked Donovan's GPS. The battery was low, but it confirmed her position in the general direction she needed to travel. The map he had given her was more valuable, a detailed topographic chart with handwritten notes about water sources and terrain features not on standard maps. His years of experience in this region encoded in pencil marks and symbols. His final gift to her. When night fell, Morgan began moving west, using the stars for navigation, a skill her father had drilled into her from childhood. The mountain air turned cold quickly, but she welcomed it after the day's heat. She covered approximately 15 kilometers before dawn, moving steadily but cautiously, always listening, always watching for enemy patrols. At first light, she found another hide position, this time in a small cave formed by fallen boulders with water nearby. She drank carefully, purifying the water with tablets from her aid kit, and assessed her situation. Day 1 complete, approximately 185 kilometers from friendly territory if her navigation was correct. Enemy forces actively searching for survivors. Zero contact with friendly units. Ammunition sufficient for maybe 2 firefights if she was conservative. As she rested during daylight, Morgan heard helicopters, enemy aircraft searching the area. They were conducting a methodical search pattern, which meant they either knew she'd survived or were being thorough. Either way, she needed to avoid detection. The next 3 nights followed the same pattern. Move west during darkness, hide during daylight, avoid all enemy contact. She supplemented her water from streams, ate nothing. Her body could survive weeks without food, but only days without water. The physical strain was taking its toll, but Morgan's mental discipline prevented her from dwelling on discomfort. Each kilometer was 1 kilometer closer to friendly forces, one step closer to delivering the intelligence about a potential traitor in their midst. On day 4, her situation changed dramatically. She was moving through a narrow pass when she heard voices, a large enemy patrol, at least 30 fighters moving through the area in a search pattern. They were between her and her western route, which meant she either waited for them to pass or moved around them through more difficult terrain. Morgan chose a third option that her training normally wouldn't recommend. She would shadow them, staying just out of detection range, and use them as early warning for other enemy forces. They were clearly searching for something or someone, which meant they'd avoid other enemy units to prevent fratricide. For 6 hours, she moved parallel to the patrol, staying 200 meters out, using their noise to mask her own movement. She learned their radio protocols, their discipline level, which was poor, and most importantly, their destination, a forward operating base approximately 20 kilometers ahead. That base was directly in her path west. She'd have to go around it, adding days to her journey, or she'd have to eliminate the threat somehow. As the patrol stopped to rest, Morgan observed from concealment. Through gaps in the rocks, she could see they were relaxed, undisciplined weapons carelessly slung. They didn't expect to actually find anything. This was routine search pattern to them. That's when she heard the radio transmission that changed everything. Checkpoint 7, this is command. American female soldier confirmed alive in sector. High-value target, increased search intensity. Reward for capture. She has intelligence on coalition operations. Do not kill. Capture alive for interrogation. They knew she was alive. They knew she was female, and they wanted her alive for interrogation, which meant torture and intelligence extraction before eventual execution or use as propaganda. Morgan felt cold calculation replace any thought of simple evasion. They were actively hunting her with significant forces. Avoiding them indefinitely in terrain they knew better than her would be nearly impossible. Waiting for rescue that didn't know she was alive was futile. She needed to change the tactical situation. She needed to become the hunter instead of the hunted. As Morgan watched the Taliban patrol prepare to move out, her eyes locked on their ammunition bearer, a fighter carrying extra magazines and grenades for the patrol. He was moving at the rear, separated from the main group by about 20 meters, apparently struggling with the weight. An opportunity presented itself, and Morgan made a decision that would alter the course of her survival. She would hit them when they least expected it, eliminate their ammunition supply, create chaos, and disappear before they could respond effectively. Psychological warfare combined with surgical strikes. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting back. Morgan moved ahead of the patrol, positioning herself on high ground overlooking their route. She had clear sight lines to their path and multiple escape routes. When the ammunition bearer passed below her position, separated from his unit by 30 meters, Morgan took the shot. One round from her M24, suppressed by the canyon walls and distance, dropped the ammunition bearer instantly. Before his body hit the ground, she was moving to her secondary position 50 meters away. The patrol reacted with confusion. They'd heard something but couldn't identify direction or threat. By the time they found their fallen comrade and his scattered ammunition, Morgan was in position to observe their response. They went into defensive posture, scanning the rocks, trying to determine where the shot had come from. Their leader was shouting into his radio, calling for backup and reporting contact with an unknown enemy. Morgan waited. Patience was as much a weapon as her rifle. After 20 minutes, the patrol began moving again, but now they were tense, alert, weapons ready. They'd gone from relaxed search to active combat mindset. Good. That meant they'd be more cautious, move slower, and tire faster. She shadowed them for another hour, then struck again. This time she targeted their radio operator from 300 meters, a difficult shot through the canyon, but within her capability as a designated marksman. The shot dropped the operator and destroyed the radio he was carrying. Now they couldn't communicate with command. They were isolated, afraid, and had no idea how many enemies they faced. The patrol leader made a decision: retreat to their base for reinforcement. They began moving faster, abandoning tactical discipline for speed. That's when Morgan struck a third time. She'd positioned herself ahead of their retreat route in an area where the trail narrowed between rock formations. As the lead elements entered the natural choke point, she fired her remaining rounds in controlled bursts into the rocks around the formation. In the chaos and confusion, with gunfire echoing from the canyon walls making it impossible to determine direction, the patrol broke. They scattered into the wilderness, abandoning their planned retreat, each fighter trying to save himself. Morgan had just routed a 30-man patrol using less than 20 rounds in basic infantry tactics. She'd eliminated their ammunition and supply, their communications, and their unit cohesion without ever exposing herself to direct fire. But she had also announced her presence and capabilities to the enemy. They now knew she wasn't just alive, she was dangerous and actively engaging their forces. As Morgan moved away from the engagement site, she knew the situation had fundamentally changed. Within hours, the enemy would commit significant forces to finding her. They couldn't allow a single American soldier to continue disrupting their operations and killing their fighters. She needed to move faster and farther, but she also needed to continue creating chaos. The more forces they committed to finding her, the fewer they had for other operations. She was a force multiplier in reverse, tying down enemy resources while surviving on minimal supplies. It wasn't just about getting home anymore. It was about making them pay for Donovan. The fifth night found Morgan outside a small Taliban outpost that controlled the only water source for miles. She had observed it for hours, noting the guard rotations, the defensive positions, and most importantly, the sloppiness of their security protocols. 8 fighters manning the outpost's fortified position, heavy weapons, but poor discipline. Under normal circumstances, Morgan would have avoided the outpost entirely, but she needed supplies and, more importantly, a working radio. If she could make contact with American forces, she might not need to walk all the way back to friendly territory. She positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the outpost, watching the guards through her scope. The night was clear, a half moon providing just enough light to see without needing night vision that she didn't have. Morgan waited for the guard change, the moment when attention would be divided between those coming on duty and those leaving. When it came, she took her shot. The heavy weapons operator never made it to his gun. The second shot took out the command post's lantern, plunging half the outpost into darkness. In the confusion, Morgan relocated, firing from a different angle, creating the impression of multiple attackers. 2 more fighters fell as they exposed themselves trying to identify the threat. The remaining Taliban fighters returned fire blindly, shooting at shadows. Morgan waited patiently, conserving ammunition until a clear target presented itself. When the outpost commander emerged from a bunker shouting orders, she put a round through his chest. The final 3 defenders broke and ran, disappearing into the darkness, leaving the outpost undefended. Morgan moved quickly but cautiously into the abandoned position. Inside, she found what she needed: ammunition compatible with her weapons, food, water, medical supplies, and most importantly, a working radio. She didn't stop to use it there. The gunfire would draw attention. She gathered what she could carry and moved out, putting another 5 kilometers between herself and the outpost before finding a defensive position in the rocks. Only then did she risk using the radio. She cycled through frequencies until she found one she recognized, an American military emergency channel. She keyed the transmit button. Any American forces, this is Viper 2 Actual, Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan. Transmitting in the blind, I am alive and operating in hostile territory. Grid coordinates unknown. Convoy was destroyed 5 days ago. Was declared KIA. Need immediate assistance. She paused, listening for a response. Nothing but static. I am mobile, armed, and evading enemy forces in battalion strength. I have intelligence on a possible security breach at a command level. Someone set up our convoy. I have been conducting harassment operations and am being actively hunted. Request any available extraction or support. Viper 2. Actual out. Morgan transmitted the message 3 times on different frequencies, then destroyed the radio. Using it for extended periods would allow enemy direction finding equipment to locate her. She didn't know if anyone had received her transmission. She didn't know if anyone was even listening, but she'd done what she could. Now she kept moving because stopping meant capture or death. Unknown to Morgan, her transmission had been received by a signals intelligence station 400 kilometers away. Within 30 minutes, the information reached Special Operations Command. Sir, we just received a transmission claiming to be from Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan. She was declared KIA 5 days ago in the ambush that destroyed her convoy. The colonel commanding the Special Operations Task Force looked at the transcript. Authentication codes. She didn't transmit any, sir, but she used correct call signs and described tactical situation consistent with someone operating in that sector. Could be enemy deception. They captured her and forced transmission to draw in rescue assets. Possible, sir, but she mentioned conducting harassment operations. We've received reports of a single operator disrupting enemy logistics in that exact area for the past week. Enemy is committing significant forces to finding what they describe as an American female soldier. The colonel studied the intelligence reports. Single operator, female operating independently, with no support conducting effective guerrilla operations against numerically superior forces. It matched everything he knew about Alexis Morgan, a combat medic and designated marksman who'd been recommended for special operations training before her reported death. There's something else, sir. She claims someone at command level set up their convoy, that it was an ambush. The colonel's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. Yes, sir, but there have been other intelligence anomalies in that sector. Operations compromised enemy, seemingly prepared for our movements. Prep a search and rescue package. Delta team with air support. If Morgan is alive and still fighting after 5 days alone in hostile territory, we're not leaving her there. But we do this smart. Confirm she's actually alive before we commit aircraft to penetrate defended airspace. Over the next 12 hours, reconnaissance drones scoured the area where the transmission had originated. They found evidence consistent with Morgan's story, a destroyed Taliban outpost, scattered patrol signs of ambush tactics, consistent with special operations training. Then they found something else. A message spelled out in rocks on a hillside, visible only from aerial observation, grid coordinates and a time. 2200 hours at grid MV847392. Morgan had left them a rendezvous point and time. She was directing her own rescue. Gutsy, the Delta team commander said, looking at the drone footage. She's telling us exactly where and when she'll be. Trusting we saw this, an enemy didn't. Sir, that grid is in a valley surrounded by high ground. Perfect ambush terrain. Could be enemy trap. Or could be Morgan picking terrain that favors defense until we arrive. Only one way to find out. At 21 to 30 hours on day 6, 2 MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters lifted off carrying a Delta Force rescue team. They flew nap of the earth to avoid enemy radar approaching the valley from an unexpected direction. As they approached the coordinates, the team leader scanned the valley floor through night vision. I've got movement. Single individual taking cover at the edge of the landing zone. Confirm identity, the pilot ordered. Before they could, the radio crackled to life. Rescue birds, this is Viper 2 actual. About time you showed up. LZ is cold for now, but I expect company within 10 minutes. Taliban QRF was active half a click east as of 20 minutes ago. Recommend rapid extraction. The voice was female professional, despite obvious exhaustion. The Delta commander couldn't help but smile at her tone, calm and directive despite her situation. Viper 2 actual, this is Rescue 1. Good to hear your voice. Moving to your position now. Prepare for immediate extraction. The helicopters descended into the valley, one touching down, while the other provided covering fire from the air. The Delta operators who exited were ready for anything hostile fire, an injured casualty requiring medical assistance, or a traumatized survivor. What they found was Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, battered and exhausted, but standing on her own power, her captured AK-47 at ready position, scanning for threats while covering their approach. Despite 6 days without adequate food, minimal water injuries including cracked ribs and a previously dislocated shoulder, she maintained tactical awareness and discipline. Ma'am, we're here to bring you home, the team leader said. Morgan lowered her weapon. Took you long enough. I've been making a lot of noise hoping someone would notice. As they loaded her onto the helicopter, enemy forces were indeed converging on the valley drawn by the helicopter noise. But by the time they arrived, the Black Hawks were already gone, carrying home a soldier who had been declared dead 6 days earlier. During the flight back to base, the Delta team medic tried to assess her injuries. Morgan cooperated minimally, acknowledging broken ribs, the dislocated shoulder. She had reset in the field dehydration and exhaustion, but insisted none were life-threatening. Ma'am, you've been operating alone for 6 days with no support. Most people wouldn't have lasted 6 hours. Morgan looked at him with tired but fierce eyes. They left me in enemy territory, declared me KIA without confirmation. I wasn't about to die just to prove them right. She clutched Donovan's compass in her hand, the cold metal, a reminder of her mentor and his sacrifice. More importantly, she carried evidence of a traitor at command level, someone who had deliberately sent them into an ambush, someone who would pay for Donovan's death. As the helicopters approached the forward operating base, Morgan looked out at the lights below. She had survived the impossible, but her mission wasn't complete. She had information that could save other American lives and a debt to repay. The hard part was over, but a different kind of battle was about to begin. "I'm coming for you," she whispered, thinking of the unknown traitor who had caused Donovan's death. "Whoever you are." The Black Hawk banked toward the landing zone, and Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan prepared to fight a new kind of war, one where the enemy wore the same uniform she did. On the sixth day after the ambush that should have killed her, Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan walked into Forward Operating Base Condor under her own power, refusing a stretcher despite her injuries. The base personnel stared in disbelief at the woman who had been officially listed as killed in action nearly a week earlier. Her uniform was torn and bloodstained. Her face was sunburned and wind-chapped. She had lost at least 10 pounds from her already lean frame. But her eyes were clear and focused as she was escorted directly to the command center, where Colonel Matthews, head of special operations for the sector, waited to debrief her. The journey was over, but the mission to find the traitor who had caused Donovan's death was just beginning. And in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, a legend was already growing about the ghost soldier who had survived the impossible and brought war to those who had tried to kill her. They had abandoned her in enemy territory with no backup. They had declared her KIA. They had no idea what they had unleashed. The medical bay at Forward Operating Base Condor was a symphony of beeping monitors and hushed voices when Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan finally allowed herself to close her eyes. 6 days of constant vigilance had taken their toll, and even her iron discipline couldn't keep exhaustion at bay forever. But her sleep was light alert, the sleep of a predator rather than prey. She woke instantly when the door opened. Colonel James Matthews stepped into the room, his weathered face giving away nothing. At 54, Matthews had the build of a man who still maintained the physical standards he expected from his troops. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in Morgan's condition with a single sweep. "Staff Sergeant, the doctors tell me you've refused pain medication." Morgan sat up straighter, ignoring the protest from her cracked ribs. "Yes, sir. I need a clear head." Matthews nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her, bed posture formal, but not unfriendly. "Your rescue has created quite a stir. Not every day we recover a soldier officially listed as KIA. And Master Sergeant Donovan, sir, has his body been recovered?" A shadow passed over Matthew's face. "Not yet. Territory is heavily contested. But I give you my word, we will bring him home." Morgan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He sacrificed himself to give me a chance to escape, sir, and to deliver intelligence about a security breach at command level." "So I've been told." Matthews leaned forward slightly. "That's a serious accusation, Staff Sergeant. I need to hear exactly what happened from the beginning." Morgan recounted the events methodically, from Donovan's concerns about the mission to the perfectly coordinated ambush to his final revelation about suspecting a traitor. She described her 6 days behind enemy lines with clinical precision, as if delivering a mission report rather than recounting a harrowing survival ordeal. "Donovan told me he reported his concerns directly to Colonel Harrison. Hours later, we were ambushed in exactly the location he had flagged as suspicious." Matthew's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. "Colonel Harrison was transferred back to Bagram Air Base 2 days after your convoy was hit, officially for a staff rotation." "Convenient timing, sir." "Indeed." Matthews stood pacing slowly at the foot of her bed. "We've had several operations compromised in the last 3 months. Intelligence leaks, ambushes, supply convoys hit with surprising precision. Nothing concrete enough to trigger a formal investigation until now." He stopped pacing and fixed her with a penetrating stare. "Your survival changes things, Staff Sergeant. If there is a traitor, your very existence is a threat to them, which means you're still in danger even here." Morgan met his gaze steadily. "With respect, sir, I'm not the one who should be worried." A ghost of a smile touched Matthew's lips. "No, I don't suppose you are. Rest now, Staff Sergeant. That's an order. We'll continue this conversation when the doctors clear you. After Matthews left, Morgan eased herself out of bed and checked her personal effects. Donovan's compass was still there along with his kabar knife. She gripped them both briefly, a silent promise to her fallen mentor, then returned to bed. But sleep eluded her now, her mind working through the implications of Matthew's words. If Harrison was the traitor, why transfer him to Bagram rather than arrest him? And if he wasn't, who else had the authority and information to compromise their mission so thoroughly? The door opened again and Morgan tensed, but it was only a nurse checking her vitals. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of two armed soldiers stationed outside her room. Protection or containment, she couldn't be sure. One thing was certain, her battle was far from over. It had just changed terrain. 3 days later, Morgan was cleared for light duty, though light was a relative term in her mind. She had spent her recovery time meticulously studying maps of the region where she had been operating. Marking Taliban positions, she had observed creating a comprehensive intelligence picture that no satellite or drone could provide. She was reviewing these notes when a knock came at her door. A young sergeant stood at attention. "Staff Sergeant Morgan, Colonel Matthews requests your presence at the command center immediately." Morgan followed him through the base, noting the glances from other personnel. Word of her survival and rescue had spread, growing with each telling. She ignored the attention focused only on the mission ahead. The command center was a hub of controlled chaos screens displaying tactical maps, intelligence feeds, and communication channels. Matthew stood at a central table with several other officers. He waved Morgan over as soon as she entered. "Staff Sergeant, this is Major Roberts from Intelligence and Captain Wilson, our Air Operations Coordinator." Morgan acknowledged them with a crisp nod. Matthews activated a secure display on the table. "12 hours ago, one of our surveillance drones captured this." The screen showed thermal imagery of a Taliban convoy moving through mountain passes. 3 trucks heavy escort. Intelligence suggests they're transporting a high-value individual. "What makes this relevant to our discussion, sir?" Morgan asked, studying the footage. Matthews tapped the screen, freezing on an image of the lead vehicle. "This." He zoomed in on a figure visible through enhanced imaging. Though grainy, the silhouette was unmistakably Western, not Afghan. "We believe this is an American military advisor meeting with Taliban leadership." Morgan's pulse quickened. "Harrison, we can't confirm identity from this footage, but the timing aligns with his movements. He left Bagram on authorized leave 3 days ago." Matthews switched the display to a map. "The convoy is heading to this location, a Taliban training camp in a valley approximately 70 kilometers from where you were rescued." "With respect, sir, why haven't we hit this location with an airstrike?" Major Roberts interjected. "Political considerations. The camp is near a village. Without absolute confirmation that Harrison is our traitor, we can't risk civilian casualties on a hunch." Matthews nodded. "We need eyes on the ground. Someone who can positively identify Harrison and document his activities." Understanding dawned on Morgan. "You want me to go back in?" "Not just you." Matthews pulled up another file. "During your absence, we received intelligence about another American service member believed to be held by Taliban forces in that region. Lieutenant Robert Collins, Air Force pilot, shot down 3 weeks ago, officially listed as MIA, presumed dead." The image on screen showed a young officer with an easy smile and confident eyes. Morgan recognized the type, immediately skilled, probably cocky, the kind of pilot who loved pushing the envelope. "Intel suggests he's being held at a location near the training camp," Matthews continued. "If he's alive, he may have valuable information. He was conducting surveillance flights over the same areas where our operations were compromised." Morgan processed the implications quickly. "A 2-part mission then: locate and extract Lieutenant Collins and confirm whether Harrison is working with the Taliban." "Correct. Deep reconnaissance only. Document but do not engage unless absolutely necessary for survival or mission success." Matthews looked at her intently. "I don't need to tell you how dangerous this is or how unofficial. If you're captured, the military will deny all knowledge of your operation." "Just like last time, sir," Morgan replied, her voice steady. Matthews had the grace to wince slightly. "Not exactly like last time, Staff Sergeant. This time you'll have proper equipment insertion via halo jump and emergency extraction protocols in place." He paused, measuring his next words. "But I won't order you to do this. After what you've been through, no one would question if you declined." Morgan thought of Donovan, of his sacrifice of the other soldiers who might die if the traitor continued operating. Her answer was never in doubt. "When do I leave, sir?" Matthews nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Tonight, full briefing in 1 hour. Gear up, Staff Sergeant." The briefing was comprehensive, covering everything from insertion coordinates to emergency extraction procedures. Morgan would halo jump into the mountains near the training camp, establish observation, locate Collins if possible, and document Harrison's activities. A small team would be on standby for emergency extraction, but the mission was designed for her to operate alone, using the skills that had kept her alive during her previous ordeal. As she prepared her gear, checking each item with methodical precision, Morgan thought about the man she was hunting. Colonel Harrison had always been respected, if not particularly well-liked. Ambitious, demanding, but by all accounts loyal to the mission and his troops. What could drive such a man to betray everything he had sworn to uphold? Money was the obvious answer, but Morgan suspected it went deeper. Betrayal of this magnitude usually stemmed from a profound sense of grievance, a belief that one had been betrayed first. Harrison was a 20-year veteran, passed over for promotion multiple times despite exemplary service. Perhaps that was enough. It didn't matter. Whatever his reasons, he had sent good soldiers to die. He had sent Donovan to die. That was all Morgan needed to know. The halo insertion went exactly as planned, a textbook operation that delivered Morgan to her landing zone under cover of darkness. She buried her parachute and began moving, immediately navigating by starlight and the terrain features she had memorized during the briefing. By dawn, she had covered 15 kilometers of rugged mountain terrain and established a forward observation post overlooking the valley where the Taliban training camp was located. Through her scope, she could see the camp coming to life with morning activities. Vehicle movements, guard rotations, training exercises. It was a substantial operation, far more sophisticated than typical Taliban facilities. Morgan documented everything using the high-resolution camera she had been equipped with. There was no sign of Harrison or Collins yet, but patience was a sniper's greatest ally. She settled in for extended observation, controlling her breathing, staying perfectly still for hours at a time, becoming part of the landscape. On the second day, Morgan spotted a patrol moving along a ridge approximately 2 kilometers from her position. Their movement pattern was too disciplined for standard Taliban fighters. Someone had trained these men in advanced tactics. She tracked them through her scope, noting their Western-style equipment and the confident way they handled their weapons. As the patrol disappeared into a ravine, Morgan made a decision. They were heading in the direction of what appeared to be a smaller outpost separated from the main camp. If Collins was being held prisoner, that would be a more likely location than the bustling main camp. She needed to get closer. Moving only during the brief twilight periods at dawn and dusk, Morgan carefully made her way toward the outpost. It was a calculated risk, but one she deemed necessary. By the third night, she had worked her way to within 500 meters of the facility, close enough to observe without being detected if she remained disciplined. What she saw confirmed her suspicions. The outpost was more heavily guarded than its size would warrant, with a reinforced building at its center. A detention facility, almost certainly. She documented guard rotations, noting the routine was precise, changing every 4 hours. Whoever ran this operation maintained strict discipline. On the fourth morning, Morgan observed a vehicle approaching the outpost from the main camp. Through her scope, she watched as several men exited, including one whose bearing and appearance immediately marked him as non-Afghan. Even at this distance, she recognized Colonel Harrison. The confirmation sent a cold wave of certainty through her. Donovan had been right. She adjusted her camera, capturing clear images of Harrison speaking with Taliban commanders, reviewing documents, inspecting the facility. This was no forced cooperation or coercion. Harrison moved with the confidence of a man among allies, a man in control. As she documented the interaction, Morgan noticed Harrison and the Taliban commander heading toward the reinforced building. They entered, remaining inside for approximately 20 minutes before emerging with a third man between them. Even from her position, Morgan could see this new figure was American, though his condition was poor. He stumbled as he walked, clearly weakened, but his head remained unbowed. Lieutenant Collins still alive despite weeks in captivity. Morgan fought down the immediate impulse to intervene. Her mission was reconnaissance only. But watching Collins being paraded before the Taliban fighters, seeing Harrison personally involved in his interrogation, tested her discipline to its limits. She continued documenting everything, gathering the evidence that would condemn Harrison and hopefully save Collins. After Harrison departed, Morgan remained in position, developing a more complete understanding of the outpost's security. 8 guards total rotating in pairs. 2 at the main entrance, 2 patrolling the perimeter, 2 monitoring the detention building, and 2 resting. Predictable, which made it vulnerable. As darkness fell on the 4th night, Morgan made another decision that went beyond her mission parameters. She would attempt to make contact with Collins. The intelligence he might possess, combined with her own evidence against Harrison, could be decisive. But more than that, she would not leave another American to suffer at the hands of the Taliban and a traitor. She moved under cover of darkness, using the terrain and shadows to approach the outpost's blind spots. The Taliban had night vision capabilities but used them sparingly due to battery limitations, a weakness she intended to exploit. Morgan positioned herself near the detention building's only window, a small opening too narrow for escape, but sufficient for communication. Using a specialized laser pointer that was invisible except through night vision equipment, she signaled into the window using standard military recognition code. For long minutes, there was no response. Then faintly a tapping pattern replied from within. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS followed by the tap pattern for US. Morgan felt a surge of controlled satisfaction. Collins was alive, conscious, and aware enough to respond. She tapped back a simple message. Extraction coming. Hold position. Then, knowing time was limited, she added intel priority. The response came quickly. Harrison. Traitor. Selling weapons. Location Southwest Building. Morgan acknowledged and withdrew before the guard rotation could discover her presence. The information was significant. Not just intelligence, but weapons. Harrison wasn't just betraying operational details. He was arming the enemy directly. She needed to verify Collins's claim. The Southwest Building in the main camp would be her next target for observation. If Harrison was indeed running a weapons supply operation, the evidence would secure his conviction and execution for treason. Moving back to her original observation post, Morgan considered her options. The mission had expanded beyond simple reconnaissance. With Collins confirmed alive and Harrison's treason, documented extraction became the priority. But extracting Collins would alert Harrison to their knowledge of his activities. He would disappear potentially to continue operations elsewhere. The tactical calculus was clear. She needed to document the weapons operation, extract Collins, and if possible, ensure Harrison had no escape route. A tall order for one operator, but Morgan had already beaten impossible odds once. She would do so again. The following day, Morgan relocated to a position overlooking the southwest quadrant of the main camp. Through careful observation, she identified the building Collins had referenced. Activity around it was unusually high, with trucks arriving and departing under heavy guard. Using her camera's maximum zoom, she captured images of crates being loaded and unloaded. The markings were unmistakable American military hardware, including what appeared to be anti-aircraft missile components. Harrison appeared midday, overseeing the operation personally. Morgan documented everything, building an ironclad case against him. But as she observed, a new complication arose. Harrison was preparing to leave. She overheard radio communications indicating a convoy was being assembled to transport him back to friendly territory the following morning. The timeline had suddenly compressed. If Harrison left, extracting Collins became both easier and less valuable. The primary target would escape, potentially to cover his tracks and continue operations elsewhere. Morgan made a difficult decision. She would accelerate the timetable, attempting to extract Collins that night, while simultaneously ensuring Harrison remained on site until evidence could be acted upon. It meant abandoning the strict reconnaissance parameters of her mission, but the strategic value outweighed the risks. As dusk approached, Morgan prepared for the operation. She would create a diversion at the main camp, drawing attention and resources away from the outpost where Collins was held. Under cover of chaos, she would extract Collins and withdraw to a predetermined extraction point where they could call for emergency evacuation. The plan was high risk, especially the first phase. Creating a sufficient diversion without exposing herself would require perfect timing and a measure of luck. Morgan had learned long ago that luck favored the prepared. Using the remaining daylight, she assembled improvised explosive devices from components in her kit. Nothing lethal, but sufficient to create confusion and draw attention. She placed them strategically around the perimeter of the main camp, focusing on the vehicle pool and communications equipment. As full darkness descended, Morgan took up position and triggered the first device. The explosion illuminated the night, followed quickly by shouts of alarm and the sound of running feet. She triggered the second and third devices in sequence, creating the impression of a coordinated attack from multiple directions. The response was immediate and predictable. Guards rushed to the perceived threat, vehicles mobilized, and radio traffic exploded with confused reports. Most importantly, additional forces were dispatched from the outpost to reinforce the main camp exactly as Morgan had hoped. She moved quickly toward the now undermanned outpost, using the darkness and confusion to her advantage. The remaining guards were alert but distracted, their attention divided between their duty and the chaos unfolding at the main camp. Morgan neutralized them efficiently using non-lethal means where possible. These men were tools, not the architect of betrayal. Reaching the detention building, she found the door locked but unguarded. A shaped charge from her kit made short work of the lock. Inside, she found Collins chained to a metal frame, his body showing signs of interrogation and malnutrition, but his eyes still defiant. "About time," he rasped when she entered, managing a weak grin despite his condition. "I was starting to think my message didn't get through." "Lieutenant Collins," Morgan acknowledged, working quickly to free him from his restraints. "Can you walk?" "I can dance if it gets me out of here," Collins replied, though he staggered when he tried to stand. Morgan supported him, assessing his condition with a medic's eye. Dehydration, malnutrition, various contusions, and possible fractures, but nothing immediately life-threatening. "We have approximately 10 minutes before they realize something's wrong here," she informed him, handing him a sidearm. "Extraction point is 3 kilometers northeast. Can you make it?" Collins checked the weapon with practiced ease despite his condition. "Lead the way, Staff Sergeant. I've got a score to settle with a certain colonel when we get back." "Get in line, Lieutenant." Morgan led them out into the darkness, using routes she had memorized to avoid patrols and maximize cover. Collins moved better than she had expected, adrenaline and training compensating for his weakened state. Still, their pace was slower than optimal, and the chaos at the main camp wouldn't distract the Taliban forever. They had covered approximately 1 kilometer when shouts and gunfire behind them indicated their escape had been discovered. Morgan adjusted their route, leading them into rougher terrain where pursuit would be more difficult, especially at night. "They'll bring dogs," Collins warned between labored breaths. Harrison made sure they had American training methods. "These aren't your typical Taliban fighters." "Noted." Morgan pulled a small canister from her kit and sprayed their back trail, masking their scent. Another kilometer passed Collins, weakening but refusing to slow their pace. As they approached a narrow ravine that would provide cover for the final leg to the extraction point, gunfire erupted from ahead of them. A Taliban patrol had circled around, cutting off their route. "Down!" Morgan pushed Collins into cover as bullets impacted around them. She returned fire in controlled bursts, forcing the patrol to seek cover. "We need to find another way." Collins pointed to a steep ridge to their right. "Up and over, they won't expect it." Morgan assessed quickly. The climb would be brutal, especially for someone in Collins's condition, but it offered their best chance of breaking contact. She nodded sharply. "Move when I give covering fire. I'll be right behind you." She emptied half a magazine in a suppressive burst, giving Collins the chance to begin the ascent. Despite his weakened state, his movements showed the training and determination of someone who had survived against the odds. Morgan followed as soon as he had sufficient lead, continuing to fire selectively to keep the Taliban fighters pinned. The climb was every bit as punishing as she had anticipated. Loose rock near vertical in places with minimal handholds. Collins faltered several times but kept moving through sheer force of will. Morgan stayed close behind, dividing her attention between their ascent and the pursuing fighters below. They reached the ridgeline just as dawn began lightening the eastern sky, a mixed blessing. The improved visibility would help their movement, but also make them easier to spot. Morgan checked their position against landmarks, confirming they were still en route to the extraction point, though now from a different approach. 2 kilometers, she told Collins, who was breathing hard, but still alert and moving under his own power. "Extraction team is on standby. Once we reach the point, it's 20 minutes to pick up." Collins nodded, saving his breath for the journey. They moved along the ridgeline until finding a path down the other side less steep than their ascent. As they descended, Morgan's radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Nomad, this is home plate. Be advised, satellite shows multiple heat signatures converging on your position. Estimate 2 dozen hostiles. Extraction bird launching now. But you need to buy time. Over. Morgan acknowledged the transmission. The Taliban had obviously called in reinforcements, probably at Harrison's direction. He would be desperate to recapture or kill them before they could reveal what they knew. Change of plans, she told Collins. We need a defensive position, somewhere we can hold until extraction arrives. Collins scanned the terrain with a pilot's eye for topography. There. He pointed to an outcropping of large boulders approximately 500 meters ahead. Natural choke point, high ground, limited approaches. Morgan nodded approval. It was as good as they were likely to find. They double-timed to the position, Morgan noting with concern that Collins was reaching his physical limits. The adrenaline that had carried him this far was fading, leaving only determination and training to keep him moving. They reached the outcropping just as the first Taliban fighters appeared on the ridgeline behind them. Morgan helped Collins to cover, then quickly assessed their defensive options. The boulders formed a rough semicircle against the mountain face, creating a natural fortress with clear fields of fire to the approaches, but limited withdrawal options. A good place to make a stand, but a potential death trap if overrun. How's your marksmanship, Lieutenant? She asked, setting up her rifle at the most advantageous firing position. Collins checked his sidearm. Better with an aircraft weapons system, but I can hit what I aim at. 8 rounds left. Make them count. Morgan handed him her own sidearm as a backup. I've got the rifle. You watch our flanks. Extraction ETA 18 minutes. The Taliban forces approached cautiously, having learned respect for American firepower through bitter experience. Morgan held her fire, waiting for them to commit to the attack. When they finally advanced, she took out the point man with a clean headshot, sending the rest scrambling for cover. A standoff developed with sporadic fire exchange, but no major assault. Morgan recognized the tactic immediately. They were waiting for reinforcements before committing fully. Smart, but it played into her hands. Every minute delayed was a minute closer to extraction. They're setting up positions for a coordinated attack. Collins observed, his voice steady despite his condition. I count at least 15, probably more, behind that ridge to the west. Morgan acknowledged with a nod, conserving ammunition and energy. Extraction in 12 minutes. We just need to hold. The radio crackled again. Nomad home plate. Be advised, extraction. Bird taking fire from ground positions. Delayed indefinitely until air support can suppress anti-aircraft weapons. Hold position and maintain communication. Over. The news hit like a physical blow, but Morgan's expression remained unchanged. Understood, home plate. Will advise if situation changes. Nomad out. She turned to Collins, whose eyes showed he had heard and understood the implications. Looks like we're on our own a little longer, Lieutenant. Story of my life lately, he replied with a gallows humor. Got any bright ideas? Before Morgan could respond, the Taliban launched their attack, a coordinated assault from multiple directions. She engaged methodically, prioritizing the most immediate threats, making every shot count. Collins provided supporting fire covering approaches she couldn't address. The initial assault broke against their position like a wave against rocks, but it had revealed the full extent of the forces arrayed against them. At least 20 fighters with more visible moving to flanking positions. And they had spotted something more concerning, a Taliban commander with American tactical equipment directing the attack with professional precision. Harrison had joined the hunt personally. Home plate nomad. Be advised, primary target confirmed on site, directing enemy forces. Request immediate air support, danger close. Our position marked by IR strobe. The response came quickly. Nomad negative on air support. All assets diverted to suppressing anti-aircraft positions. Estimate 30 minutes minimum before support available. Morgan calculated rapidly. Their ammunition would not last 30 minutes against determined assault. A change in tactics was required. Lieutenant, I need a diversion, something to break their coordination. She handed him one of the remaining diversionary charges from her kit. When I give the signal, trigger this and throw it as far as possible to the east, then provide covering fire. I'm going to circle around and eliminate their command element. Collins understood immediately. You're going after Harrison. He's the key. Without his direction, their attack will lose cohesion. Morgan checked her knife, Donovan's Kabar. When the attack falters, use the radio to call extraction to these coordinates instead of the original point. That's a suicide play, Staff Sergeant, Collins said quietly. Morgan met his gaze steadily. No, Lieutenant. It's justice. Before he could argue further, she nodded sharply. Now. Collins triggered the charge and hurled it with surprising strength. The explosion sent Taliban fighters diving for cover, momentarily disoriented. Morgan used the confusion to slip out of their defensive position, moving low and fast around the perimeter of the engagement area. Years of training and recent experience behind enemy lines guided her movements. She became a ghost, invisible among the rocks, in sparse vegetation closing on the Taliban command position, where Harrison was visible directing the assault. Morgan circled to approach from behind, using natural cover to mask her advance. Harrison was focused entirely on the defensive position, where Collins continued to fire sporadically, maintaining the illusion that both Americans were still there. She closed to within 10 meters undetected, close enough to hear Harrison speaking to a Taliban commander in surprisingly fluent Pashto. Close enough to end this. Morgan launched her attack with explosive speed, neutralizing Harrison's two bodyguards before they could react. The Taliban commander reached for a weapon but fell with Morgan's knife in his throat. Harrison turned, his expression transforming from surprise to recognition to fear in the span of a heartbeat. Morgan, disbelief colored his voice. You're supposed to be dead, twice now. Sorry to disappoint, sir. She kept her voice level. Her rifle trained center mass on the traitor who had sent her and Donovan to die. On your knees, hands behind your head. Harrison's shock gave way to calculation. Be reasonable, Staff Sergeant. You have no extraction plan. The Taliban have anti-aircraft weapons covering the entire valley. No helicopter is coming for you or Collins. His voice took on a persuasive tone. I can get you both out safely. All you have to do is lower that weapon. Like you got Donovan out safely. Morgan's finger tightened fractionally on the trigger. Like you got our entire team out after deliberately sending us into an ambush. War requires sacrifice, Harrison replied, his tone hardening. Donovan was a relic clinging to outdated notions of honor and duty. This conflict will never end through conventional means. Sometimes you have to work with the enemy to shape the peace, while selling them weapons to shoot down American aircraft. Morgan kept her aim steady. That's not shaping peace, Colonel. That's treason. Harrison's expression darkened. You have no idea of the bigger picture, Staff Sergeant. The deals I've made will save more American lives in the long run than your blind obedience to a failed strategy. Maybe, but they cost Donovan his life, and that's all I need to know. Morgan's voice was ice. Now on your knees or I'd end this right here. For a moment it seemed Harrison would comply. Then his hand moved, reaching for a concealed weapon. Morgan fired twice center mass, the shots echoing across the valley. Harrison fell backward, eyes wide with shock, blood spreading across his chest. Morgan approached cautiously, weapon trained on the fallen officer. Harrison was still breathing, though labored the wounds fatal, but not immediately so. You've killed us all, he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth now. Let them try. Morgan searched him quickly, retrieving a satellite phone and intelligence documents. I survived once, I'll do it again. Harrison's eyes were fading, but a final spark of defiance remained. I'm not the only one. Others see the truth. This war can't be won the old way. Maybe not, Morgan acknowledged, watching the life drain from the traitor's eyes, but it won't be lost through betrayal either. Not while soldiers like Donovan still exist. Harrison's final breath rattled in his chest, his eyes fixed and empty. Morgan closed them with a soldier's respect for the dead, if not for the man, then for the uniform he had dishonored. She keyed her radio. Lieutenant, target neutralized. Command structure disrupted. How's your position? Collins' voice came back strained but resolute. Holding but not for long. Taliban forces regrouping after losing coordination. I count at least 20 still active. What's your status? I have Harrison's sat phone and documents. Possible intel value. Morgan assessed her situation rapidly. Remain in position. I'll create a diversion to draw them off, then circle back to you. Extraction, still our best hope. Understood. But don't take too long, Staff Sergeant. I'm down to my last magazine. Morgan moved quickly to the Taliban command vehicle, rigging it with her remaining explosives on a delayed timer. The blast would create confusion and possibly convince the Taliban that their American allies had been killed, buying precious time. As she finished the preparations, a new sound cut through the mountain air. helicopter rotors approaching fast from the south. Not the extraction team, they would come from the northeast. These were Taliban reinforcements potentially equipped with the very anti-aircraft weapons Harrison had sold them. Morgan keyed her radio again. Home plate Nomad. Be advised, enemy air assets inbound to our position. Request immediate support, any available assets. The response was immediate and unexpected. Nomad, this is Archangel Actual. Friendly QRF inbound on your position, ETA 2 minutes. Pop smoke to mark your location. Morgan recognized the call sign instantly. Archangel was Colonel Matthews' personal designation. He had come for them himself, risking a daylight extraction in contested airspace. Lieutenant, we've got friendly QRF inbound. 2 minutes. Mark position with smoke when you hear them approach. Copy that. Collins responded, relief evident, even through the radio static. Best news I've heard in weeks. Morgan triggered the explosive timer on the Taliban vehicle and began moving back toward Collins's position. The enemy forces were still focused on the defensive position, but their attacks had become disorganized without Harrison's direction. The helicopter sounds grew louder, resolving into the distinctive beat of Black Hawk rotors. As they crested the ridge, Morgan saw 2 attack helicopters accompanying the transport, providing suppressive fire against Taliban positions. Collins popped green smoke, marking their location for the extraction team. The Black Hawk descended rapidly, hovering just long enough for armed operators to fast rope down and establish a defensive perimeter. Morgan reached Collins as the team was securing him for evacuation. Staff Sergeant Morgan, a Delta operator shouted over the rotor wash. Colonel Matthews sent us personally. Where's Harrison? Dead, Morgan replied, simply handing over the satellite phone and documents she had recovered. These might tell us if he was working alone. The operator nodded sharply, then gestured to the helicopter. Let's move Taliban reinforcements inbound. As they loaded Collins aboard the explosive Morgan had set, detonated, sending the Taliban command vehicle up in a fireball. The distraction provided perfect cover for the final phase of extraction, the Black Hawk lifting away as the attack helicopters continued to suppress enemy positions. Morgan sat beside Collins, both of them secured for the rapid departure. As the helicopter banked hard, gaining altitude to clear the mountains, she caught a glimpse of the valley below. The Taliban forces were scattered, their command structure eliminated, their American ally dead. It wouldn't end the war. It wouldn't even end the threat of betrayal from within. But it was justice for Donovan, and it had saved at least one American life. For today, that was enough. Collins leaned toward her, shouting over the engine noise. You came back for me, alone, against orders. Morgan thought of Donovan, of his sacrifice, of the lesson he had taught her through his final act. No one gets left behind, Lieutenant. That's a promise we keep, no matter the cost. As the helicopter climbed higher, leaving the mountains behind, Morgan gripped Donovan's compass in her palm. She had survived. She had completed the mission. She had honored her mentor's sacrifice. But the war within the ranks was just beginning. The flight back to base was a blur of rotor noise and medical attention. Collins was immediately taken for treatment, his weeks of captivity and interrogation requiring urgent care. Morgan found herself escorted directly to Colonel Matthews, who waited on the tarmac as the helicopters landed. Mission successful, Staff Sergeant. Matthews stated, his eyes taking in her condition with professional assessment, though somewhat beyond parameters. Harrison is dead, sir, Morgan reported formally. He confirmed his treasonous activities before attempting to draw a weapon. Matthews nodded, unsurprised. And the intelligence materials? Recovered, sir. Documents and a satellite phone should provide leads on whether he was working alone. He wasn't, Matthews replied grimly. While you were in the field, we uncovered financial transactions linking Harrison to at least 2 other officers. This conspiracy goes deeper than we thought. Morgan absorbed this information with outward calm, though inwardly she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The mission wasn't over. It had only just begun. What happens now, sir? Matthews gestured toward the command center. Now, Staff Sergeant Morgan, you help us find the rest of the traitors. After you get medical attention and some rest. His expression softened slightly. You've done enough for one day. Donovan would be proud. Morgan straightened despite her exhaustion. Thank you, sir. But with respect, I don't think we're done yet. No, Matthews agreed, his voice hardening again. We're just getting started. He looked out over the base, his expression unreadable. There's a storm coming, Staff Sergeant. And you've just placed yourself at its center. Morgan followed his gaze, taking in the busy activity of the forward operating base, wondering how many others might be compromised, how far the betrayal might extend. The thought should have been daunting, but instead she felt a cold clarity of purpose. They had abandoned her in enemy territory. They had declared her dead. They had betrayed everything the uniform stood for. Now it was her turn to hunt them down one by one, no matter how high the conspiracy reached. "I'm ready, sir," she said simply. And she was. The sterile corridors of Bagram Air Base held an unsettling calm. The distant thud of helicopters and the occasional muffled explosion beyond the perimeter were oddly comforting to Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan, reminders of a war fought in the open. It was the silence that put her on edge, the measured footsteps of medical personnel, the hushed conversations that stopped when she approached the weight of watching eyes. 3 days had passed since she'd put 2 rounds into Colonel Harrison's chest, ending his betrayal permanently. 3 days of medical evaluations, intelligence briefings, and the growing certainty that her battle had merely begun. The satellite phone and documents recovered from Harrison's body had revealed tendrils of conspiracy reaching far beyond a single treasonous officer. Morgan sat on her hospital bed studying surveillance photos of 3 senior officers: Colonel James Wilson from Logistics Command, Brigadier General Michael Reynolds, Regional Operations, Major General David Crawford, Theater Commander. One of them, perhaps all, had authorized the weapons transfers Harrison had facilitated, had signed the death warrants for Donovan and countless others. The snap of the door lock breaking the silence made her hand instinctively reach for a weapon that wasn't there. "At ease, Staff Sergeant. If I were here to kill you, I wouldn't knock." The man who entered wore an impeccably tailored suit that failed to disguise his military bearing. Mid-50s with prematurely silver hair and eyes that registered everything with cold precision. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to rooms few had clearance to enter. "James Keller, Defense Intelligence Agency," he said, closing the door behind him. "And before you ask, yes, Colonel Matthews has cleared my presence here." Morgan didn't relax. "DIA doesn't typically make hospital visits, sir. And special operations medics don't typically eliminate colonels during unsanctioned rescue operations." Keller's expression remained neutral, but something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Yet here we are." He placed his briefcase on the bedside table and removed a small device, activating it with practiced efficiency. A faint electronic hum filled the room. "Signal jammer," he explained. "What I'm about to share isn't for everyone's ears, including your 2 watchdogs outside." "Protection or containment?" Morgan asked, voicing the question that had nagged her since noticing the armed guards stationed outside her room. "Both." Keller took the seat beside her bed. "You've stumbled into something considerably larger than a rogue colonel selling weapons to the Taliban. We've been tracking this network for 14 months, and you just blew a hole in its operational security." Morgan studied the man more carefully. Beneath the bureaucratic exterior, she recognized the hard edges of someone who'd seen combat. The way he scanned the room, the deliberate economy of movement, the calluses visible on hands more accustomed to weapons than paperwork. "SEAL." A ghost of a smile touched Keller's face. "Team 6, 15 years. Transferred to DIA when my knees decided they'd had enough of jumping out of perfectly good aircraft." He opened his briefcase again, extracting a file with the highest security classification. "Colonel Matthews tells me you're trustworthy. More importantly, the fact that you're still breathing suggests you're competent." "High praise," Morgan said dryly. "The highest I give." Keller spread photographs across her bed, surveillance images of weapons transfers, bank statements, covert meetings. Harrison was middle management at best. He executed orders, managed logistics, but the weapons he provided, particularly the advanced surface-to-air missiles, required authorization from someone with significantly higher clearance. Morgan examined the evidence, her tactical mind assembling the pieces. "One of the 3 officers Matthews showed me. Or a combination. We've traced financial transactions to offshore accounts linked to both Wilson and Crawford. Reynolds remains a question mark, either uninvolved or better at covering his tracks. And you're telling me this because," Keller leaned forward, his voice dropping, "because in approximately 72 hours, whoever orchestrated this conspiracy will make an attempt on your life. You're the only witness who can directly link Harrison to the ambush that killed your team, the only person who heard his confession before eliminating him. That makes you a loose end, and loose ends in operations this size get cut." Morgan absorbed this without visible reaction, though internally her mind was already calculating angles, vulnerabilities, countermeasures. So I'm bait, potentially the most effective bait we've had in 14 months of investigation, Keller confirmed. With your cooperation, we can create a scenario that forces their hand, reveals their identity, and provides actionable evidence. And if I decline, then I arrange your immediate transfer to a secure facility stateside, where you'll remain under protective custody until this plays out. You'll be safe, but we lose our best chance at identifying the mastermind. Keller studied her with clinical detachment. Your call, Staff Sergeant. No one would blame you for choosing safety after what you've already endured. Morgan thought of Donovan, of his sacrifice, of the promise in his eyes when he pressed the compass into her palm. The choice was never really in doubt. What's the plan? The door opened before Keller could respond, admitting Lieutenant Robert Collins. The pilot had clearly been through multiple surgeries and medical treatments since their rescue. Though still showing signs of his Taliban captivity, two thin eyes haunted by experiences that would never fully fade, he carried himself with the resilience that had kept him alive during those weeks of torture and isolation. He stopped short at the sight of Keller, instinctively assessing the stranger in the room. Sorry, I didn't realize you had company. Lieutenant Collins, Keller acknowledged, standing to offer his hand. Your timing is excellent. Please join us. Collins hesitated, glancing at Morgan for confirmation. Only when she nodded did he step fully into the room, closing the door behind him. The lieutenant is part of this, Morgan asked, surprise evident in her voice. Not officially, Keller admitted. His military physicians have recommended medical discharge processing at Walter Reed. However, given his unique position as the only other American who directly witnessed Harrison's treasonous activities, his participation would be advantageous. Collins's eyes hardened. They're shipping me stateside tomorrow. Medical discharge. I requested reassignment to whatever operation takes these bastards down, but was denied. His jaw tightened. Said I'm too valuable as a witness to risk in field operations. That's the official position, Keller agreed. Unofficially, I believe your perspective would be valuable, particularly since you spent weeks listening to Harrison's conversations with his Taliban allies, conversations that likely included mentions of his American partners. Morgan watched Collins carefully. During their brief but intense time together in the mountains, Ibrahim's, she'd come to respect his determination and courage. But this was different, asking an already traumatized officer to deliberately place himself in danger again. What exactly would this involve, sir? Collins asked, directing the question to Keller, but keeping his eyes on Morgan. A coordinated deception operation, Keller explained. We create a narrative that you and Staff Sergeant Morgan recovered additional evidence, from Harrison evidence that could identify his superiors in the conspiracy. We allow this information to filter through appropriate channels, then monitor the response. We become targets, Collins translated, controlled targets in a scenario of our design. Keller gestured to the signal jammer. Every detail would be planned, every contingency anticipated. The risk would be significant but calculated. Collins moved to the window, staring out at the mountains where he'd been held captive for weeks. When he turned back, his expression had hardened into resolve. I spent 23 days listening to Harrison discuss weapons shipments with his Taliban friends. 23 days watching American-made missiles being prepared to shoot down our aircraft. 23 days imagining what would happen to my squadron when those weapons were deployed. His voice remained steady, but his hands had clenched into fists. If you think I'm sitting this out, you've severely misjudged me. Morgan felt an unexpected surge of respect. She'd rescued Collins primarily because leaving an American behind was unthinkable, but in that moment she recognized a kindred spirit, someone driven by the same sense of duty and justice that propelled her. It won't be easy, she warned. These people have resources, authority, and absolutely nothing to lose if exposed. Collins met her gaze directly. Neither do we, Staff Sergeant. Keller observed their exchange with clinical interest, then nodded as if confirming a hypothesis. Very well, let's begin planning. Over the next 48 hours, a carefully orchestrated performance unfolded. Morgan and Collins underwent extensive debriefing sessions with Keller and his team, making sure to appear exhausted but determined when returning to their rooms. Medical staff vetted by Keller personally commented within earshot of other personnel about recovered intelligence materials, and electronic evidence linking senior officers to Harrison's operation. Word spread through the base precisely as Keller had anticipated. By the second evening, Morgan could sense the shift in atmosphere, the increased surveillance, the subtle changes in security protocols, the heightened tension among certain officers. Collins visited her room that night, escorted by a guard who remained outside. When the door closed, he immediately activated one of Keller's signal jammers. "It's working," he said without preamble. "I overheard two intelligence officers discussing my transfer tomorrow. Apparently, there's concern about the sensitive materials I might be transporting." Morgan nodded. "Keller's analysts have detected increased encrypted communications between Bagram and Pentagon servers associated with Logistics Command. Wilson Adaon, possibly, or someone using his access credentials." She shifted uncomfortably, her cracked ribs still painful despite treatment. "Your transport's still scheduled for 0600 IO, unchanged." Collins took the chair beside her bed, his movements betraying the lingering effects of weeks of malnutrition and abuse. "Medical discharge processing at Walter Reed. Meanwhile, you're being transferred to Landstuhl for specialized treatment of your injuries." "Creating multiple targets," Morgan observed, "splitting their attention and resources." Exactly as Keller predicted. Collins ran a hand through his short hair, a nervous gesture at odds with his otherwise controlled demeanor. "Speaking of our spy master, he left something for you." From his pocket, Collins produced a small metal case, passing it to Morgan with deliberate care. Inside, nestled in protective foam, lay a seemingly ordinary military insignia pin. "Subdermal transponder," Collins explained. "Completely passive until activated by a specific frequency, undetectable by standard scanning equipment. He wants it implanted tonight before your transfer." Morgan examined the device with professional interest. "Surgical procedure. Minimally invasive. Base surgeon has been briefed one of Keller's people from another operation." Collins hesitated, then added, "I've already received mine. Back of the neck, beneath the hairline." Morgan closed the case, setting it aside. "Do you trust him, Keller?" Collins considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I trust that he wants to catch these traitors. Beyond that," he shrugged, "in my experience, men like him operate in shades of gray. They'll sacrifice pieces to win the game. And we're the pieces. Expendable but valuable," Collins agreed, "which means he'll try to keep us alive as long as we're useful." Morgan found herself smiling despite the grim assessment. "That's practically a ringing endorsement in our line of work, Lieutenant." Collins returned her smile, the shared gallows humor creating a moment of genuine connection between two warriors who'd seen too much of the darkness. "Call me Rob. After what we've been through, military formalities seem redundant." "Alexis," she offered in return, "though most people stick with Morgan." "I noticed. Even Donovan called you Morgan." Collins' expression softened. "He meant a lot to you." Morgan felt the familiar tightness in her chest at the mention of her mentor's name. "He was the closest thing to family I had left. Trained me, believed in me when others didn't." She touched the compass in her pocket, Donovan's final gift. "He died covering my escape." "The best of us often do," Collins said quietly. "My squadron commander did the same when our aircraft was shot down. Ordered me to eject, stayed at the controls long enough to steer away from a village." His eyes took on the distant look of someone revisiting painful memories. "Last thing he said was, 'Make it count, Collins.'" Morgan understood the weight of such a command, the obligation that came with survival when others didn't. "We will," she promised, "starting tomorrow." The next morning unfolded according to Keller's meticulous planning. Collins was escorted to a medical transport aircraft bound for Ramstein Air Base in Germany, the first leg of his journey to Walter Reed. Morgan watched from her window as the C-17 took off, carrying her unlikely ally into his phase of the operation. Her own transfer was scheduled for the following day, a calculated delay designed to divide the conspiracy's attention. The transponder, now safely implanted at the base of her skull, provided a reassuring weight as she prepared for what would come. That evening, as Morgan sorted through her few personal possessions, a nurse she didn't recognize entered her room with medication. "Pre-flight sedative, Staff Sergeant," the woman explained, preparing a syringe with practiced efficiency. "Doctor's orders for tomorrow's transport." Morgan noted the inconsistencies immediately, the lack of proper identification protocols, the failure to check her chart, the slight tremor in otherwise steady hands. I don't recall the doctor mentioning pre-flight medication. It was added to your chart this morning, the nurse replied, smoothly approaching the IV line in Morgan's arm. Long-haul medical transport can aggravate injuries like yours. This will help manage the discomfort. Morgan allowed the woman to come closer, maintaining the appearance of a trusting patient. At the last moment, as the nurse moved to inject the solution, Morgan's hand shot out with precision, born from years of combat training. She gripped the woman's wrist, applying precise pressure to nerve points that sent the syringe clattering to the floor. I think we both know that's not standard medication, Morgan said quietly, increasing pressure until the nurse gasped in pain. The woman's professional facade crumbled instantly, replaced by cold calculation and then fear as she realized she was trapped. Morgan maintained the disabling grip while triggering the call button with her free hand. The response was immediate, but not what she expected. Instead of hospital staff, two men in orderly uniforms burst into the room, weapons drawn. They secured the nurse with practiced efficiency, one covering her with his weapon, while the other zip-tied her wrists. Keller appeared in the doorway seconds later, surveying the scene with clinical detachment. "Well executed, Staff Sergeant," he said, directing his men to remove the now restrained nurse, though I'd hoped they might be marginally more sophisticated in their first attempt. Morgan released her grip, flexing fingers that had automatically positioned for a more lethal intervention. "What was in the syringe? We'll analyze it, but given the objective, likely a powerful sedative or something more permanent." Keller picked up the syringe, carefully examining it before placing it in an evidence bag. "This attempt was crude, arranged hastily after we began circulating rumors about your transfer. They'll try something more sophisticated tomorrow." "The nurse isn't part of the conspiracy," Morgan observed. "Hired help, possibly coerced." "Almost certainly. We'll interrogate her, but I doubt she knows anything of value." Keller checked his watch. "Your transfer proceeds as planned. Joe 600 tomorrow. This incident changes nothing except to confirm we're on the right track." After Keller departed with his men and their prisoner, Morgan sat in silence, processing the encounter. The transponder at the base of her skull itched slightly, a psychosomatic response to knowing it was there, rather than any physical irritation. Her thoughts turned to Collins, already in transit to Germany. His part of the operation would be unfolding now, creating the second front in their elaborately staged deception. Sleep came in fits that night, broken by tactical planning and memories of Donovan. In her dreams, he stood on a ridgeline, watching her through his rifle scope, mouth moving with words she couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Keep moving, don't stop, make them pay." She woke at 0430, alert and focused despite the interrupted rest. By 0530, she was prepared for transfer, her few possessions packed, Donovan's compass secure in her pocket. The medical transport team arrived precisely on schedule, their credentials verified by Matthews personally. The colonel accompanied Morgan to the airfield, maintaining the appearance of a commanding officer, seeing off a valued soldier while conveying last-minute instructions under his breath. Keller's team reports Collins successfully arrived in Germany 6 hours ago. No incidents during his flight, but they're anticipating action during ground transport. Matthews kept his voice low, his expression giving nothing away to potential observers. "Your aircraft has been specially prepared. 2 of Keller's operatives are embedded as medical staff, armed and ready if needed." Morgan nodded almost imperceptibly. "And when we land, that's where we expect the real attempt. The Landstuhl transfer creates multiple vulnerabilities during ground transportation." Matthews maintained a formal demeanor, but his eyes conveyed genuine concern. "Your primary objective is to identify whoever's coordinating this operation. We need to trace this back to the source. And stay alive in the process," Morgan added dryly. Matthews' expression hardened. "That's an order, Staff Sergeant. We've lost enough good soldiers to these traitors." The loadmaster signaled that boarding was commencing. Matthews offered a formal salute, which Morgan returned crisply, despite her injuries. As she turned toward the waiting C-17, he added, "Godspeed, Morgan. Donovan would be proud." The words hit with unexpected force, a reminder of what drove her beyond the tactical objectives and strategic goals. This wasn't just an operation, it was justice for a man who had been father, mentor, and friend. The flight to Germany proceeded without incident, almost disappointingly routine. Morgan maintained her cover as an injured soldier, engaging in light conversation with other patients, but revealing nothing substantive. The two DIA operatives posing as medical staff performed their roles with professional precision, giving no indication of their true purpose. They landed at Ramstein Air Base in the early evening, the German countryside shrouded in gathering twilight. As patients were offloaded, Morgan noted the well-choreographed efficiency of the process. Ambulances waited to transport them to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, approximately 15 minutes away by road. Morgan was directed to the second ambulance in a three-vehicle convoy, accompanied by one of Keller's operatives posing as a medical attendant. As they settled in for the journey, the man checked his equipment with methodical precision, maintaining the appearance of medical procedure while actually verifying communications and weapons. Three-vehicle convoy, he reported quietly into a concealed microphone. Package in Vehicle 2, beginning transport. The convoy pulled away from the airfield headlights, cutting through the deepening darkness as they headed toward the medical center. Morgan scanned the passing landscape, automatically identifying defensive positions, potential ambush points, and escape routes, with the ingrained habits of someone who had survived behind enemy lines. "Any word from Lieutenant Collins?" she asked, keeping her voice casual for any listening devices they might have missed. "Successfully delivered to Walter Reed Processing," the operative replied. "No incidents during transport." Morgan frowned slightly. That didn't align with the operation as planned. Collins should have been targeted during his ground transport in Germany, creating the diversion that would allow them to track communication patterns back to the source. If he'd reached Walter Reed without incident, "That's good to hear," she said, mind racing through implications and possibilities. Either their enemies had focused all resources on her instead of splitting their attention, or a vehicle pulled out sharply from a side road ahead, forcing the lead ambulance to brake hard. Simultaneously, another vehicle closed rapidly from behind, boxing in the convoy. "Contact front and rear," the operative announced calmly, drawing a concealed weapon. "Likely interdiction attempt." Morgan was already moving, retrieving the compact sidearm Keller had hidden beneath her medical transport gurney. "How many?" "At least 4 in the lead vehicle. Unknown number in pursuit." The operative maintained professional detachment. "QRF is 3 minutes out. We need to hold position until they arrive." The lead ambulance driver attempted evasive action, trying to maneuver around the blocking vehicle, but precision gunfire disabled his front tires. The rear ambulance was similarly immobilized within seconds. "Military precision," Morgan noted, positioning herself away from windows. "These aren't local contractors." Armed men in civilian clothing emerged from the blocking vehicles, moving with tactical discipline toward the ambulances. Their weapons were suppressed, their movements coordinated with the unmistakable efficiency of special operations training. "Vehicle 2, this is oversight," a voice crackled through the operative's communications device. "QRF is inbound 2 minutes. Hold position and maintain package security." "Copy, oversight," the operative acknowledged. "Be advised, hostiles appear to be using American or Western special operations tactics." Morgan analyzed the approaching threat through the ambulance window. 4 from front, at least 3 from rear. They're establishing a crossfire position. They want to take the ambulance intact. "Capture rather than kill," the operative agreed. "They need to know what you know before eliminating you." The lead attacker reached the first ambulance, yanking open the door and dragging out the driver. The message was clear: surrender or face deadly force. They weren't targeting the other patients specifically, but would remove any obstacles to reaching Morgan. "We can't wait for QRF," Morgan decided, watching as innocent medical personnel were being roughly handled. "Too many civilians at risk." She checked her weapon. "I'll create a diversion toward the lead vehicle. You extract the patients from the third ambulance and establish a defensive position." "That wasn't the plan, Staff Sergeant," the operative cautioned. "Keller's orders were to protect you at all costs." "And I'm protecting the mission," Morgan replied firmly. "If they take me, the transponder will lead you straight to whoever's running this operation. Track me, but don't intervene unless absolutely necessary." Before the operative could object further, Morgan moved to the ambulance door and slipped outside, using the vehicle for cover. The attackers had not yet reached her position, still dealing with the lead ambulance. She used the momentary advantage to fire 2 precise shots at the lead vehicle's gas tank, creating a spectacular but non-lethal diversion. The resulting fire and smoke created instant confusion among the attackers. Morgan fired again, dropping one attacker with a leg wound before ducking back into cover. The DIA operative used the distraction to begin evacuating patients from the third ambulance, establishing a defensive position behind their vehicle. Morgan counted to three, then made a deliberate move into the open, appearing to attempt a flanking maneuver, but actually presenting herself as a target. The response was immediate. Two attackers broke off from the main group, moving to intercept her with practiced coordination. Morgan fired once more, deliberately missing to maintain the illusion of desperate resistance before allowing herself to be flanked and captured. Target secured, one of the men reported into a radio, his accent unmistakably American despite his attempt to disguise it. Package in custody, primary extraction route compromised, moving to secondary. They secured her weapons efficiently, binding her hands with tactical restraints before hustling her toward a third vehicle that had appeared during the confusion, a nondescript van with tinted windows. In the distance, sirens wailed, indicating the approach of both German authorities and likely the QRF that Keller had positioned nearby. The attackers shoved her into the van with professional roughness, pulling away from the scene just as the first police vehicles appeared on the horizon. Inside, Morgan assessed her captors while maintaining the appearance of angry resistance. Four men, all with the unmistakable bearing of American Special Operations, though they wore no identifying insignia. "Who are you working for?" Morgan demanded, testing their responses. "Shut up," the man beside her uttered, checking her restraints with professional thoroughness. His inspection was methodical, searching for hidden weapons, communication devices, or tracking equipment. His fingers brushed against her hairline at the base of her skull, making her tense involuntarily, but he moved on without discovering the subdermal transmitter. The van drove for approximately 30 minutes, taking an erratic route designed to identify and lose any pursuit. Morgan memorized turns and landmarks, building a mental map of their journey through unfamiliar German countryside. They eventually arrived at a small private airfield where a Learjet waited, engines already running. She was transferred to the aircraft with military efficiency, secured to a seat with reinforced restraints, and searched again more thoroughly. Her captors were professionals, missing nothing except the one thing designed to be missed: Keller's sophisticated transponder. The jet took off minutes later, banking sharply to the east. Only when they reached cruising altitude did one of her captors finally address her directly. "Staff Sergeant Morgan," he said, studying her with clinical interest. "Your survival skills continue to impress. First Afghanistan, now Germany." Morgan met his gaze evenly. "And you are someone interested in what you recovered from Colonel Harrison's body." The man's voice carried the clipped precision of someone accustomed to giving orders, specifically the documentation that implicates others in his operation. "I followed procedures," Morgan replied neutrally. "Everything I recovered was turned over to intelligence officers at Bagram." "Everything?" The man's tone suggested skepticism. "No insurance policy, no copies kept for personal protection." Harrison had evidence that implicated people far above his pay grade. A soldier with your background would recognize the value of such information. Morgan said nothing, letting him interpret her silence however he wished. The man studied her for a moment longer, then nodded to one of his colleagues, who produced a satellite phone and dialed a number from memory. "Package secured and in transit," he reported. "ETA 3 hours to primary site, no complications." He listened briefly, then handed the phone to Morgan. "Someone wants to speak with you." Morgan took the phone cautiously, maintaining her expression of controlled defiance. "Staff Sergeant Morgan." The voice on the line was cultured, authoritative, and carried the unmistakable weight of senior command. "I apologize for the unorthodox nature of this meeting, but certain conversations are best held outside official channels." "Who am I speaking to?" "Someone who appreciates your extraordinary skills and loyalty to your fallen comrades. Someone who can ensure Master Sergeant Donovan receives the full honors and recognition his sacrifice deserves." The casual mention of Donovan sent a surge of cold anger through Morgan, but she controlled her reaction carefully. "What do you want?" "Merely to clarify some misunderstandings. Colonel Harrison was operating outside his authority, conducting unauthorized negotiations with enemy forces. His actions have been misinterpreted as part of a larger conspiracy, when in fact he was a rogue operator, possibly suffering from post-traumatic stress and disillusionment." Morgan recognized the narrative immediately. They were creating a cover story isolating Harrison as a lone traitor, rather than part of a systematic betrayal. "That's not what Harrison told me before he died." A pause waited with calculation. "People say many things when facing death, Staff Sergeant, especially those seeking to spread blame for their own actions." The voice hardened slightly. What matters now is how this situation is resolved with minimal damage to ongoing operations and American interests in the region. And how exactly would that happen, Morgan pressed? You'll be taken to a secure facility where you can review the actual intelligence surrounding Harrison's activities. Once you understand the full context, I believe you'll recognize the importance of presenting a unified narrative to both the military justice system and eventually the public. Translation, they would show her selectively edited intelligence pressure her to support their cover story. And if she refused, she would likely never leave the secure facility alive. And if I've already shared everything I know with DIA investigators, Morgan countered, another pause longer this time, then we would need to address those inaccuracies before they spread further. The stability of command structures in an active war zone depends on trust and clear authority. False accusations against senior officers undermine that stability and ultimately cost American lives. The threat was clear if carefully worded. Morgan decided to push harder. I'd be more inclined to hear your perspective if I knew who I was talking to. A soft chuckle came through the phone. Of course. This is Major General David Crawford. I believe we haven't had the pleasure of meeting in person, though that will be rectified shortly. Crawford, one of the three officers Keller had identified as potential conspirators, the highest ranking among them. Morgan kept her voice neutral, despite the surge of satisfaction. I look forward to it, General. As do I, Staff Sergeant. We'll continue this conversation when you arrive. In the meantime, I suggest you rest. You've been through a significant ordeal, and clarity of thought will be important for our discussion. The line went dead and Morgan returned the phone to the waiting operative. Her mind was already analyzing the new information fitting Crawford's words and tone into the broader picture of the conspiracy. The general had been careful saying nothing explicitly incriminating, but his involvement in her extraction from official custody was damning in itself. The flight continued in silence, the four operatives watching her with professional detachment. Morgan closed her eyes, appearing to follow Crawford's suggestion to rest, but actually considering her options. The transponder should now be active, transmitting her location to Keller's team. The question was whether they could track her to whatever secure facility Crawford had prepared and whether Collins was safely playing his role in the operation. 3 hours later, the aircraft began its descent. Through the window, Morgan could see they were approaching a private airstrip in what appeared to be desert terrain. The landscape suggested the southwestern United States, possibly Nevada or Arizona, though without more references she couldn't be certain. They landed smoothly on a well-maintained runway adjacent to a cluster of buildings that had the unmistakable look of a government black site. No markings, no flags, nothing to identify its purpose or ownership, but with security measures evident even from the air. This was a facility designed for operations that officially didn't exist. Morgan was escorted from the aircraft to a waiting SUV, her captors maintaining their professional detachment. The drive to the main compound took less than 5 minutes. Inside the facility was clinically institutional, with the sterile efficiency of a place where protocol overrode personality. She was led to what appeared to be a comfortable debriefing room rather than an interrogation cell, another indication that they were maintaining the pretense of an official, if classified, operation rather than an abduction. A tall, distinguished man in Army service uniform waited inside his posture parade ground, perfect even at rest. Staff Sergeant Morgan. Major General David Crawford studied her with keen intelligence, his silver hair and weathered features projecting the authority of his rank. Thank you for joining us for this consultation. Morgan didn't correct his absurd characterization of her abduction. Did I have a choice, sir? A thin smile crossed Crawford's face. There are always choices, Staff Sergeant. Some simply carry more significant consequences than others. He gestured to a chair across from his own. Please be seated. We have much to discuss. As Morgan took the offered seat, Crawford dismissed the operatives with a curt nod. When the door closed behind them, he leaned forward slightly. I'll be direct, Staff Sergeant. The situation with Colonel Harrison has created a complex intelligence problem. His unauthorized activities have compromised several ongoing operations and relationships in the region. Unauthorized. Morgan kept her tone just short of insubordinate. Harrison was running a sophisticated weapons distribution network, coordinating with Taliban forces and compromising American operations. That level of activity requires resources and authority beyond a single colonel. Crawford's expression remained impassive. Harrison was highly intelligent and resourceful. He developed personal relationships with regional warlords during previous deployments and leveraged those connections for his own purposes. Unfortunately, mental health issues and possibly financial problems led him to betray his oath. And the weapons, Morgan challenged, advanced surface-to-air missiles aren't exactly available at the base exchange. No, they aren't. Harrison exploited his position in the supply chain to divert weapons intended for Afghan National Army training. A serious security lapse that is being addressed. Crawford's voice hardened slightly. But what concerns me more is the narrative that has developed suggesting Harrison was part of a broader conspiracy involving senior command. Morgan met his gaze steadily. That narrative is supported by evidence recovered from Harrison himself. Manipulated evidence, Crawford corrected smoothly. Harrison was creating insurance policies implicating others to reduce his own culpability if caught, a common tactic among traders. He activated a display screen on the wall showing financial records and communication logs. These are Harrison's actual records, not the selectively edited versions you may have been shown at Bagram. They show conclusively that he was acting alone using cutouts and false identities to create the appearance of higher authorization. Morgan studied the documents carefully, noting the professional quality of the forgeries. If she hadn't already seen the authentic records that Keller had recovered, she might have found these convincing. Interesting interpretation? Crawford smiled thinly. Not interpretation, Staff Sergeant. Fact, verified by multiple intelligence agencies. He deactivated the display. Which brings us to your role in this situation. My role? You survived an ambush that Harrison arranged. You tracked him down and eliminated him during a highly irregular solo operation. You recovered documents that purport to implicate senior officers in his treasonous activities. Crawford leaned back, studying her with calculated intensity. That makes you either an invaluable witness to help close this unfortunate chapter, or a significant complication in an already complex situation. The threat was clear if carefully worded. Morgan kept her expression neutral. I'm simply a soldier who followed orders and survived when others didn't. Indeed, and soldiers follow orders. Crawford stood, moving to a sideboard where a folder waited. These are your new orders, Staff Sergeant. Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to a specialized training unit at Fort Bragg. Your experience behind enemy lines is invaluable for preparing the next generation of operators. He handed her the folder, which contained official-looking transfer documents. You'll report directly to me in my capacity as Oversight Director for Special Warfare Training. Your official statement regarding the Harrison incident will reflect the confirmed intelligence assessment that he was a lone actor suffering from operational stress and possibly undiagnosed mental health issues. Morgan took the folder without opening it. And if my recollection of events differs from that assessment, Crawford's smile vanished entirely. Then we would need to consider whether your own traumatic experiences have affected your recall and judgment. Extended psychological evaluation might be required before you could return to duty. Perhaps even a medical discharge if the trauma proves too severe. He let the implications sink in before continuing. Alternatively, your heroic actions and survival against incredible odds make you an ideal candidate for advancement. Special Forces Qualification Officer Candidate School, if you desire it, meaningful assignments where your unique skills would be properly utilized. Reward or punishment, thinly veiled but unmistakable. Morgan had expected nothing less. When would this transfer take effect? Immediately. There's a transport waiting to take you to Fort Bragg tonight. Crawford checked his watch. You have 1 hour to review the official documentation and prepare any questions before departure. Morgan nodded slowly as if considering the offer. And Master Sergeant Donovan's remains, you mentioned ensuring he receives full honors. Already in progress, a special operations team has been dispatched to recover his body and those of your other team members. They'll receive the recognition they deserve for their sacrifice. Crawford's voice softened slightly, a calculated show of empathy. Donovan was a fine soldier. It's unfortunate his last mission was compromised by Harrison's betrayal. The manipulation was so transparent that Morgan had to control her expression. Crawford was offering everything she might want: justice for Donovan's career advancement. Purpose, all she had to do was ignore the truth and accept the lie. I'd like some time to review these orders, she said finally. Crawford nodded, satisfied with what he perceived as her wavering resolve. Of course, one of my aides will return in 30 minutes to address any questions and escort you to the transport. He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. I believe you'll make the right decision as Staff Sergeant. You have proven yourself to be a survivor. Survivors understand what battles are worth fighting and which ones only lead to unnecessary casualties. After Crawford left, Morgan examined the room methodically, noting the camera in the corner and the probable listening devices. She opened the folder and reviewed the transfer documents, which appeared authentic and complete. The general had prepared thoroughly, creating a paper trail that would withstand scrutiny if necessary. 25 minutes later, something unexpected happened. The lights throughout the facility flickered, then went out completely before emergency generators kicked in. Through the thin walls, Morgan could hear sudden movement, raised voices, and the unmistakable sound of suppressed weapons fire. The door to her room burst open, revealing a figure in tactical gear, face concealed behind a ballistic mask. For a fraction of a second, Morgan tensed for combat, then recognized the distinctive hand signal of Keller's DIA tactical team. Staff Sergeant Morgan, the operator confirmed, voice muffled by his equipment. Friendly extraction team, time to move. Morgan didn't waste time with questions. She followed the operator into the corridor, where 4 more tactical team members had secured the hallway. Bodies of Crawford's security personnel lay on the floor, neutralized with surgical precision. This way, the lead operator directed, guiding her toward what appeared to be a service exit. Exfil vehicle is 30 seconds out. As they moved through the facility, Morgan noted the comprehensive nature of the operation's security systems: disabled communications, jammed resistance, eliminated with minimal casualties. Keller's team operated with the seamless efficiency that came only from extensive training and experience. They reached the service exit just as gunfire erupted from another section of the facility. Crawford's personal security, one of the operators explained, putting up more resistance than expected. Where is Crawford? Morgan asked as they moved toward a waiting helicopter, its rotors already spinning. Security office attempting to purge electronic records. We have a team converging on his position now. The helicopter lifted off as soon as they were aboard, banking hard to clear the facility's perimeter. Through the window, Morgan could see a firefight developing near what appeared to be the main entrance, Crawford's security forces attempting to prevent additional DIA teams from entering. Keller, she asked over the intercom. Coordinating from our forward command post, the team leader replied. He'll debrief you personally when we reach secure territory. Morgan settled back, processing the rapid turn of events. The transponder had worked, allowing Keller to track her to Crawford's black site. The assault had been planned and executed with precision, but Crawford himself was still unaccounted for. The operation wasn't complete. What about Lieutenant Collins? She asked, realizing she had no information about his status. The team leader hesitated before responding. Lieutenant Collins deviated from the operation plan. He'll brief you himself at the command post. Morgan frowned at the non-answer, but had no opportunity to press further as the helicopter accelerated, carrying them away from the black site and the firefight still unfolding beneath them. 30 minutes later, they landed at what appeared to be a military installation, though one without obvious identifying markings. Morgan was escorted to a prefabricated command center, where Keller waited, surrounded by monitors displaying tactical feeds from the ongoing operation. Staff Sergeant, he acknowledged without looking up from the displays. Excellent work drawing Crawford out. We've been trying to locate that black site for months. What about Crawford? Morgan asked, cutting to her primary concern. Keller's expression tightened. Currently attempting to access an escape tunnel we hadn't identified in our initial breach. We have teams converging, but the outcome is uncertain. And Collins, your man, said he deviated from the plan. At this, Keller finally turned to face her fully. Lieutenant Collins was supposed to be extracted from Walter Reed Processing yesterday and brought to a secure DIA facility. Instead, he escaped from his protective detail and inserted himself directly into our operation against explicit orders. Morgan felt a surge of both concern and grudging admiration. Where is he now? With the team pursuing Crawford. Keller nodded toward one of the monitors where tactical camera footage showed operators moving through a narrow underground passage. He insisted that as the only other person who could positively identify Crawford as Harrison's contact, his presence was essential to prevent any claim of mistaken identity. On the screen, the tactical team reached what appeared to be a concealed exit. The lead operators breached the door, revealing a small hangar containing a helicopter prepped for immediate departure. Standing beside it, pistol raised, was Major General Crawford. Across from him, weapon also drawn, stood Lieutenant Robert Collins. "Drop the weapon, General." Collins' voice came through clearly on the audio feed. "It's over." Crawford's face was a mask of cold fury. "You have no idea what you're interfering with, Lieutenant. This war requires hard decisions that soft men in Washington can't understand. Everything I've done has been for the greater strategic good. Selling weapons to the Taliban, arranging the ambush that killed Morgan's team, that was for the greater good." Collins's voice remained steady despite the pistol aimed at his chest. "Tactical sacrifices for strategic advantages." Crawford replied, his composure fraying at the edges. "We needed reliable channels into Taliban leadership leverage that could be used to shape the eventual peace. Harrison understood that. Donovan didn't. So you had him killed," Collins stated flatly. "Along with how many others? How many American lives sacrificed for your strategic advantages?" Crawford's expression hardened. "War has always required blood. The difference is that I'm honest enough to spend it deliberately rather than wasting it through incompetence like our political leadership." Behind Crawford, tactical operators were moving into position, but he remained focused on Collins. "You could still walk away from this, Lieutenant. Your career, your future, all of it depends on the choices you make right now." Collins didn't waver. "I've already made my choice, General. When I spent 23 days listening to your pet colonel discuss weapons shipments with his Taliban friends. When I watched American-made missiles being prepared to shoot down our aircraft." His voice took on a steel edge. "When I imagined what would happen to my squadron when those weapons were deployed. You made me complicit in your treason. That ends today." Crawford's finger tightened on the trigger. "A shame. You had potential." What happened next unfolded in fractions of seconds. Crawford began to squeeze the trigger just as the tactical team opened fire from multiple angles. The general's body jerked as precision rounds found their marks, his own shot going wide before he collapsed to the hangar floor. Medical personnel immediately moved to secure Crawford, though it was clear from the camera footage that his wounds were likely fatal. Collins stood frozen for a moment, weapon still raised, before one of the operators gently lowered his arm. "Target neutralized," the team leader reported over the comm system. "General Crawford is down. Lieutenant Collins is secure. Medical assessment in progress." Keller acknowledged the report with professional detachment, but Morgan caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. "Well done, team. Secure the site and all documentation. I want everything Crawford touched, everyone he spoke with, every record he accessed." He turned to Morgan. "Crawford's down, but this isn't over. His financial records show transactions to multiple accounts we haven't yet identified. The conspiracy likely extends beyond him, potentially to Pentagon and political levels." "What happens now?" Morgan asked, watching as the tactical team secured the hangar on the monitor. "Now we gather evidence, build cases, and dismantle this network methodically." Keller's expression was grim but determined. Crawford was the operational head, but he answered to someone. Money and weapons like this don't move without high-level authorization. Morgan absorbed this, thinking of Donovan and the others who had died because of Crawford's betrayal. "And my role in this?" Keller studied her with his analytical gaze. "That depends entirely on you, Staff Sergeant. Your official debrief will conclude that you were abducted by rogue operators working for a now-deceased general with mental health issues. You'll be commended for your actions, awarded appropriate medals, and returned to regular duty with an excellent efficiency report." "That's not what I'm asking." A hint of a smile touched Keller's face. "No, I don't imagine it is." He gestured toward a side room where they could speak more privately. "Walk with me. I have a proposition that might interest you." 3 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan stood at attention in dress uniform as the flag-draped coffin containing Master Sergeant Frank Donovan was carried with solemn ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. The investigation into Crawford's conspiracy had exposed the full extent of the betrayal, weapons sold to Taliban forces, intelligence deliberately compromised American lives, sacrifice for a perverse vision of strategic advantage. Lieutenant Robert Collins stood beside her, his own recovery progressing well. The injuries he'd sustained during Crawford's final confrontation had been minor, a fact Morgan considered miraculous given the circumstances. They had shared few words during the ceremony, but the experience they had survived together created a bond that needed no verbal reinforcement. After the formal ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Morgan remained at the gravesite alone. She removed Donovan's compass from her pocket, running her thumb over the scratched metal case that had guided her through the mountains of Afghanistan. "You were right," she said quietly to the fresh grave. "About everything. Harrison, the conspiracy, all of it." She knelt, placing the compass gently atop the polished granite. "I kept my promise. Made it back. Made them pay." She felt rather than heard someone approach, standing respectfully at a distance. Without looking up, she knew it was Collins. "You should keep that," he said when she finally turned. "He'd want you to have it." Morgan picked up the compass, again considering. "It got me home once. Maybe it still has some journeys left." Collins nodded, understanding. Together, they walked slowly away from the grave, both carrying invisible weights of experiences few could comprehend. "Keller offered me a position," Morgan said after a while. "Specialized unit within JSOC, identifying and eliminating internal threats to military operations. Hunting traitors," Collins translated. "Essentially, off-books operations with minimal oversight but considerable resources." She glanced at him. "What about you?" "Medical discharge processing continues." His expression was carefully neutral. "Though Keller has suggested some consulting opportunities once my paperwork clears." Morgan couldn't help but smile slightly. Consulting, that's what they're calling it now. Apparently. Collins returned her smile, the shared gallows humor creating a moment of genuine connection. "The doctors say I'll never fly combat missions again. Too many physical complications from captivity. But intelligence analysis, operational planning, threat assessment, those skills don't require perfect health." They reached the cemetery entrance where Colonel Matthews waited beside a staff car. His expression was somber but resolute as they approached. "Staff Sergeant, Lieutenant." He acknowledged them with a nod that conveyed both respect and shared purpose. "The investigation continues. We've identified 2 more officers connected to Crawford's operation, both scheduled for covert arrest within the next 48 hours. "The weapons?" Morgan asked. "Most recovered, though some had already reached Taliban forces. We've adjusted air operations to compensate for the threat." Matthews handed her a sealed envelope. "These are your new orders. After careful consideration, and at my personal recommendation, you're being assigned to the specialized unit Keller discussed with you." Morgan took the envelope, feeling its weight, both literal and symbolic. "When do I report?" "1 week. Fort Bragg initially for specialized training, then operating with considerable autonomy." Matthews looked between her and Collins. "The lieutenant's involvement will be determined separately, but I understand Keller has plans." Collins maintained professional composure, but Morgan caught the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. Neither of them had been built for inactivity or desk assignments. Whatever consulting Keller had in mind would undoubtedly involve more direct participation than medical discharge paperwork suggested. "The unit you're joining has an unofficial motto," Matthews added, his voice dropping slightly. "No one left behind, no betrayal forgotten." "I think Donovan would approve." Morgan looked back toward the fresh grave where her mentor now rested, feeling the compass in her pocket. "Yes, sir, he would." 6 months later, on a moonless night in a different part of Afghanistan, Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan moved silently through the darkness toward a forward operating base that intelligence suggested had been compromised. She carried Donovan's compass and his lessons, both guiding her through another mission that officially didn't exist. Her earpiece crackled softly. "Overwatch in position," Collins reported from his vantage point on the ridgeline above. His medical discharge had become official 3 months earlier, followed immediately by his recruitment as a civilian intelligence consultant for Keller's expanding operation. "Copy Overwatch," Morgan acknowledged, continuing her approach to the target. Proceeding as planned. The conspiracy Crawford had led had been dismantled, its members facing military justice or worse. But the war against betrayal continued. Some battles fought against foreign enemies on distant battlefields. Others fought within the ranks against those who betrayed their oath and their comrades. Morgan had become a warrior in both worlds, a guardian against enemies, foreign and domestic. She checked Donovan's compass once more, confirming her heading toward the compromised base where another potential traitor waited, unaware that judgment was approaching. The needle pointed true, just as Donovan himself had once guided her. In the darkness of a war that never truly ended, Staff Sergeant Alexis Morgan continued the mission that would define her life, protecting those who served from the enemies they couldn't see, the traitors within their own ranks, who thought rank and power placed them beyond justice. They were wrong, and Morgan would spend the rest of her career proving just how wrong they were, one traitor at a time. In the control room back at Bagram, James Keller watched the operation unfold through encrypted video feeds, a thin smile on his weathered face. When he'd first encountered Morgan, he'd seen potential. Now he watched the fulfillment of that potential, a soldier who had transformed personal tragedy into purposeful mission, who had survived the impossible and emerged stronger. "Your protege is impressive," Colonel Matthews commented, joining Edwender at the monitoring station. Keller shook his head slightly. "Not my protege, Donovan's legacy." He watched as Morgan approached her target with precision and purpose. "We just gave her the tools and pointed her in the right direction." On the screen, Morgan paused at the perimeter fence, waiting for Collins's signal that her approach was clear. The compass gleamed briefly in the moonlight before she tucked it away, readying herself for what came next. "No one left behind," Keller murmured. "No betrayal forgotten." Their operation was just beginning, but the outcome was never in doubt. Not with Morgan on mission, not with Donovan's spirit guiding her path, not with the promise of justice driving her forward through darkness toward a light only she could see.